Thank you very much. Good morning. I'm really looking forward to this. This will be different than any other kind of speaking thing I've done because I get 24 minutes and 52 seconds now to say some stuff, and then you get a half an hour to judge it. Discuss it. I'm sorry, it's a discussion. And then another half an hour, 20 minutes or so to do question and answer, and that's when you're going to nail me on it. So this is very intimidating. But I'm delighted to be here. Because we don't have as much time as often I have, we're just going to jump right into it. Background that's kind of important to know is that I became a believer in the Jesus movement when I was 21 years old in 1969. And it took, apparently, I'm still there. So 3 years later, I was in the U.S. Navy, stationed in the Philippines, and the Lord had spoken to me about my busyness. And he wasn't pleased with how busy I was. I was in a denomination that thought busyness was the same as spirituality. And I wanted to be spiritual, so I got really busy. We got transferred to the Philippines. I wrote my congressman, Alan Cranston, and I said, Congressman, I really shouldn't be transferred to the Philippines because I'm serving the kingdom of God here in the Bay Area. And that's obviously more important than the Navy. And so you'll need to change my orders. And so he wrote back and said, well, there's no chaplain's assistant position available, so we assume it'll be God's will for you to go to the brig if you don't go to the Philippines. So landing in the Philippines, I was walking off the airplane, and I just asked the Lord to show me where the believers were, and he says, no. And I asked again, and he says, no. And I said, well, what's up? And he says, well, you have been so busy, the two of us have no time together at all. And so just you and me tonight, and the only requirement is if you talk to me for 5 minutes, which I hope you will, I would like for you to listen for 5 minutes. And so I developed the skill set of listening, which is apparently still a little bit rare in the church. During that time, he gave me the assignment. He said, you will go live in China for me, for the kingdom. I knew that in 72, but you couldn't go, so we waited 15 years and finally we went in 87. We didn't have a plan to be in BAM because you couldn't have your own company. The month we arrived, foreigners could not have their own business. But 2 months later, the laws changed. We prayed about it, put in an application. They said it would take 1.5 years to get approved. We thought that was good because we weren't ready. And I thought it's a 2-year language program. Let me finish the language program, then get a business license, and we can start then. The problem was the license came back in 30 days approved. Now I'm kicked out of the school because they said students can't do business, and I'm officially a business guy. And so that worked out good. We just moved into a traditional Chinese neighborhood. Okay, so let's start. I'm going to show a few items that we manufactured just to let you know that we were a real factory in that sense. At the height, I guess we had 650 employees. We've had 9 different businesses, all manufacturing one thing or another. And it's been a wonderful experience. They still all exist. This was one of the buildings that we had. It's a 5-story building. Some of the stuff we made was out of stained glass. We had a line of collectible villages. That's what we did for Disneyland, and that's another one. It's about 18,000 registered collectors. They were kind of strange. That table was made out of concrete. Glass reinforced concrete. The British used that for the high-rise buildings for cladding, and we made tables for Home Depot. This was another product line, bevel glass windows. In the little collectible house, we became acknowledged as the best in the world, and in this production line with 130 people, we outproduced a company with 600 people. And we had 18 defects out of 165,000 panels. When a 1 millimeter defect scratch will make it defective. They never thought it was possible. But the Lord gave us the manufacturing instructions and ideas. We've invented, or not invented, but we produced over 50 machines that we got designs from the Lord for. And so that company, the customer, when I asked him how good did we do, he said, well, I've had businesses or factories in 5 countries. This is the best I've ever seen. It was run by a girl with a 5th grade education that walked with the Lord. I'll introduce her to you in a little bit. This was a project, the Orlando Federal Courthouse in Orlando, Florida. They looked for 5 years to find a company that could duplicate a piece of modern art, which I actually thought was ugly, into stained glass. We had received an idea from the Lord about how do you combine safety glass technology and stained glass. We actually made laminated stained glass. So he said we were the only company in the world that could do that. Just to let you know, there's a thing about excellence. If you're stewarding a company with God, your rights and responsibilities dramatically change if he goes to work with you every day. Now it's primarily a communication issue. You do not have the authority to set the quality standard of your company if you're a steward. That's something that the owner does. What I found is that he likes to be really, really good. And so then you put the pressure back on him and say, okay, well, if you want to be the best in the world, you have to show up and let us know how to do that. So put the pressure back on him. He's a big boy. He can handle it. This is what we manufacture now in a company that I still own. It's fiberglass type of composite material. We can do everything from a 1/2-inch diameter to 3 feet in diameter. Our main product is a self-lubricating bushing for machinery for lifting platforms, and we're making about 1 million pieces of that every month. So this is what really changed. Would you accept someone with this as a vision statement and support them for their mission activity? Take a look. That's what mine essentially was. I hadn't written it out, but this is the way I thought. So I wanted to serve him and the church by teaching, using my company as a platform and business as access, reaching influential people to disciple. How many think that's a good vision statement? Right? I thought it was good. Apparently, the Lord did not. He said, everything is wrong. Every line is wrong. He's got such a great sense of humor. And so the first few years was the dismantling of my worldview so that I could find a way to partner with him to see how to make it successful. But this is a very American thing, right? I don't think we're doing very well in our worldview stuff in the church. Okay, so I would serve him. Do you know what's wrong with that? Who's the focus? Who gets to be the hero? In the kingdom, there's only one hero. And I don't want to be harsh, but it's not you. And it wasn't me. But I really wanted to be the hero down deep in my heart. It was really embarrassing how much I wanted to do that. And so I go there, and everything is kind of set up for me to be the star. It got changed when I decided I couldn't survive any longer. You know how sometimes you say, well, let's take it a week at a time or a month at a time? I was down to 5-minute increments. I had a hard time breathing. There was so much pressure. I remember looking at the clock, and I said, okay, it's 1 o'clock. Let's see if we can survive till 1:05. It was horrible. The pressure was so real. And it drove me back to scriptures, and I realized, hey, there's an alternative. There's a lot in scripture about this thing about abiding. And apparently, if I abide, there's some hope there. So abide in me and I in you, as the branch cannot bear fruit by itself unless it abides in the vine, neither can you. That's where I was. I wasn't abiding and I wasn't surviving. Unless you abide in me, I'm the vine, you're the branches. Whoever abides in me and I in him, he it is that bears much fruit. I was looking around and I'm thinking, well, if there is fruit here, it's rotten. So it's not very good. Apart from me, you can do nothing. That was a hard thing to swallow. But when I did, I realized, oh, this is actually much, much better. So abiding became the replacement for serving. And then I went to seminary. And in seminary, we came out with metrics. You know what metrics are? It's the way you measure your life. Do you know what the metrics were for me? It was a good evangelical seminary, and I want to honor them, I appreciate them. But the only things that I could measure were church planting and church growth. And that became a problem because in a company, you're not really church planting per se. Now, we have had 6 churches come out of our factories, but we weren't intending to do it. It was kind of like a aftermath thing. That's the right word, yeah. My English isn't very good anymore. Byproduct, yeah, there's a byproduct. Yeah. So what happened was, before I went to China, I was with different groups of business guys who would meet in the morning, and they were very energetic, and they set kind of high standards about scripture memory. And unfortunately, I was in 4 groups, and they all were memorizing different stuff. And so over a couple of years, I was forced to memorize Ephesians and Romans and Galatians and Philippians. And so whenever I saw in Scripture, like the curriculum of the Great Commission, it says, make disciples by baptizing and teaching, and my mind would go teaching Romans, teaching Philippians, teaching Ephesians, because I knew those books. I was comfortable with them. Then in China, the Lord shows up one day and has a little conversation with me, and he goes, I notice that you like Paul's writings more than you like mine. Lord, what are you getting at? He says, well, you never memorized anything I said. Why is that? My initial response was, well, your stuff is dangerous. Because I'm thinking about turning the other cheek, walking the second mile, stuff like that. So I repented, and I said, what do you want to do? And he said, why don't you memorize the Sermon on the Mount? And from the Sermon on the Mount, I realized this kingdom word keeps coming up. I mean, they went around preaching the gospel of what? Of the kingdom. So they went through all of Galilee, teaching in the synagogues and proclaiming the gospel of the kingdom. I went to seminary for 3 years. We never had one conversation on the kingdom. Go figure. Now, others, I'm sure, do nowadays. That was many years ago. But it didn't equip me for what I had. Seek first the kingdom, and everything else will fall in line. So I began to look at the kingdom as really what was actually happening. And in the past, I thought, well, I had taught in San Francisco and Seattle or Portland, and then in Tennessee, small groups of people, and they always grew to 150 people. So I was labeled as a teacher. And so I thought, I'll go to China and I'll teach. But the problem was, one of my employees who had spent 22 years in prison is just the best example of a believer I ever saw. He was 10 years older than me. He was now on a waiting list when I hired him to go to the U.S. The list was 8 years long, and he had waited 7.5 years. So he had 6 months left to go. One day at work, he said, Bill, we need to pray about something. Well, I was living a segmented life. I wasn't praying about anything at work. Work was kind of advantageous. It gave me a visa. It gave me an identity. I could answer the question, why are you in China? I said, well, I'm a business guy. That helped. But 8 to 5 was a waste of time. I wanted to get to 5 o'clock so I could go do ministry, right? And so a lot of that kind of shifted around anyway. He said, no, we got to pray about this problem. And so I went to my office with him. We shut the door, closed the blinds, and quietly prayed for 10 minutes. The police came to his house that night. And I found out days later. And they said to him, because you prayed with this foreigner, you will never be allowed out of the country. And I got mad at God. I said, this is a little frustrating. I know you sent me here, but I can't open my mouth without getting people in trouble. What am I supposed to do? And the Lord quite quickly said, well, why don't you just shut up then? And I explained to the Lord that I did go to seminary. We had no classes on shutting up. Every form of ministry required talking. But the Lord just said, no, just do the gospel. Now, I realize that in Scripture it says, how will they believe unless they hear? So somebody does need to do the talking. But it turned out to be a gifted evangelist within the company. It wasn't me. But I began to realize, what he's asking me to do is, again, not something we studied in seminary, but instead of teaching, it became modeling. In the 2008 economic downturn, we had some Christian leaders come together in the company, and they were expressing their frustration about why are we suffering the way everybody else is suffering. And then one of the leaders made this statement. He said, I still would rather have 1 year in this company rather than 100 years in Dell Computer that was down the road. Because he said, in this company, you learn to walk with God. I said, what? We don't have any walking with God programs. How do you do that? Turns out that they were watching me. I came to work one day, and one of my friends, Xiamen, was not at his workstation. And so I said, where is he? Oh, you haven't heard, boss. He's not here anymore. Well, why not? Oh, he decided that God told him to go to his family village and start a company and plant a church. I said, well, who told him he could do that? He said, apparently God did. So we had 5 of our employees go out at God's leading and start churches and companies in their hometowns. 2 of them went to an unreached group and became like medical people, all because God said that they were, told them to do it, and they've been out there for decades. So just recently came back from a month in China, and one of my partners there said, boss, we started looking at the history of the influence of that company that we were talking about. It's called Meixia. We've traced 6 generations of believers that walk with God now because of the demonstration of it. And honestly, walking with God is so much easier than I thought it was because you actually get out of the way. You don't have to do any of the heavy lifting. If you abide, he does all the hard stuff. I mean, if you have a company with 200 people and God says, now I command you to love these people, that's going to be a problem. But if he says, okay, Bill, would you please just get out of the way so I can love these people through you? That's a very different experience. He asked me to give one of the companies away after 20-something years, and so I gave it to a local believer. And then 4 years later, this guy asked me out to a banquet that they're having. And so I haven't seen these people for 4 years. And there's maybe 60 or 70 of my old friends that came. It was wonderful. But there was a new person there. And she said something I still haven't quite figured out how to process. I had not met her before. And she'd been in the company 6 months. And she sat right next to me and said, I want to get to know you. And I said, well, I'm curious why you would say that. And she says, you don't know this, but these people talk about how much you love them every single week. 4 years after I'd been there. And I thought, I don't think I have anything to compare this to. And then I realized, oh, it's happening again. You're confusing me with my friend. I got this friend, and he's really a good lover. And he was the one actually touching your lives. I was providing the body for him to show up in, but he was doing all the heavy lifting. The first time I became aware of this, we had to design an oven for one of our production lines. It was about 40 feet long and about 12 feet tall. And I tried to buy one and couldn't buy one. So I said, Lord, you need an oven for your company. So would you give me a design for it? If you do, he said, if I give you a design, will you build it? I go, yeah, I will. And so he gave me a design. We sketched it out. I gave it to one of my computer jockeys to flesh it out, in detail, and it comes back and it's got 19 or 17 doors and windows on it. And I go, I just had 2 doors on it. Where are all these other doors come from? And they go, boss, don't get upset, but you've never done this before. We don't think you know what you're doing, and it's not going to work. And so we got all these doors here to get in and fix it when it doesn't work. And I go, Lord, these guys don't think your idea is going to work. What do you want to do? And he said, let's build the metal frame and let them see it operating, because it's operating on gravity to move the stuff through instead of motors. And so when they saw it working, then they agreed that it would be okay. So what happened after that is the customer came to inspect the production line, and he got to the oven. He spent 30 minutes going around the oven, looking in, going around. He comes over and he said, Bill, where'd you get your doctorate? And I said, what are you talking about? He says, you have a doctorate in engineering, right? And I go, no, I got a degree in philosophy. The good thing about a philosophy is it doesn't disqualify you from anything. It doesn't qualify you for anything either. And so he said, well, I said, why would you think I had a doctorate in engineering? He goes, well, I've got 20 engineers, and I gave them a task very similar to this, but they couldn't come up with anything this elegant. And I go, oh, I know what's happening. Dave, I'm sorry, but I haven't told you the whole story. You see, I've got this friend, and he is really, really smart. And I asked him for help, and I think all the good ideas came from my friend. So I don't want to take credit for the good ideas. And that's when I began to realize most of my life is like that. If somebody thought something was good, it actually was because the Lord was in it, not because I was in it. And so the promise of the easy yoke, that's for another time, but there's really an incredible promise there. Okay, I got to move through here. We got 5 minutes left. So in the steward identity, it just went deeper and deeper and deeper. as I got more real about it. So my finance guy comes in one day and he goes, hey, boss, we got a problem. I looked at this for several days. There's no way around it. If we don't get $350,000 in 14 days, we have to shut down the business. And I decided I'm not going to take that weight. So he shut the door, left my office. I looked up and I go, did you hear that? Man, have you got a problem this time? And I verbalized it this way: if you don't come up with $350,000, I got to shut down your company. What do you want me to do? He said, I want you to fast and pray. And so on the 7th day, we got $172,000. On the 11th day, we got $200,000 in. And I said, that's great. Are we done? He goes, no, keep going. So we're actually in the process of trying to raise $1 million to get through a whole transition year of moving from one market, low-cost labor, to process efficiency, a whole different market. And we never raised any money. We tried to do that. And a Chinese businesswoman, a believer, came in on the 13th day, and she gave us $1 million line of credit. So don't carry the weight if you're a steward and the owner goes to work with you every day. Now it's a communication issue. Now, if the owner's not there, you're on your own. You've got a big problem. But if the owner goes with you, you got to get your mind around that reality. I thought, let's see, what was the back one? I thought I was going to use the company as a platform, but what actually happened is a fellowship grew out of it. I don't know if you can tell, but we loved each other. It was so wonderful going to work and being around believers. At one point, we started praying for everyone every day by name. We had about 200 people, and in 6 months, 80% became believers. Now you're going to work, and you got all of these young believers. And the whole discipleship thing really focuses on modeling. And you just do, like I came in one day and one of the managers said, hey, boss, I found out if I come in at 6 o'clock and lay my hands on all the machines, that day goes a lot better. I've got records. It was just this wonderful fellowship. It was just marvelous. So business as access became business as ministry when all of those people became believers in the context of the company. And I used to want to reach influential people. I think that's a good idea. I think God did that reaching Paul, but then he sent Paul to the Gentiles where he wasn't influential, so I'm not sure it's a great idea, but it seems like it makes sense. The problem is I didn't get influential people. I got beggars and poor people and uneducated people, and they weren't influential people at first. So just a quick story. Wang Haisheng, he's the guy on the left. He's very short. He shows up one day in the parking lot, and I get out of my car, and he's there waiting for me. He goes, hey, boss, how are you? And I go, hey, who are you? And I'm not your boss. And he said, well, you're going to be. And I said, what are you talking about? He said, I've been looking for you for 6 months. And he couldn't speak clearly, and he smelled really bad. And so we asked the Lord, and the Lord said, yeah, go ahead and bring him in. And so we got him some new clothes, got him a room, gave him a shower, and he comes into the company. And the first week, he breaks ranks and just leaves this position, comes over and talks to me, and he goes, hey, boss, I like to do different things every day. And I said, son, I don't care what you like to do. If you're not productive, you can't stay. And so he became a believer over the weekend, and he came back the next week, and he said, I still like to do everything, do different things. Can I go to team number 1 on Monday and team number 2 on Tuesday and team number 3 on Wednesday and do the work they don't want to do? We were making stained glass lampshades, and you have to pull wire and straighten it and curve it and cut it. And so he began to do that. Our output went up 20%. Bringing in a beggar made us millions of dollars of profit. Now, over the years, about 7 years ago, we calculated that we had brought into the community $70 million in salaries, tens of millions of dollars in taxes. And I got just a little bit of time left. One of the other guys that was on the ground, that's Xiamen, he wanted me to fund a BAM operation in his hometown, and I decided that wouldn't be a good idea. And so he became really upset, and he left the fellowship, and he got a little illegal 3-wheel cart, and he began to do illegal business. And then one day he calls me up, and he says, hey, can I take you to dinner? And he shows up in this red car that he's driving. And I go, son, what happened here? And he goes, oh, well, when I was doing that illegal stuff, I got in a car wreck. A car hit me and it sent me airborne. I was flying through the air, and about halfway through, I realized I better repent before I land. And he does, and the Lord saves him and then gives him this car. So he says, I can share the gospel with everybody that gets in my car. He was a professional driver. This is Wang Haisheng. He went out to serve another missionary in Western China for a whole year. Who would have thought? This was that award. In Chinese, it's 最爱员工的老板. So for the boss who loves his workers the most, they gave me that award in the city. The city was bigger than Los Angeles. I got that award 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, 4 year, 5 year. One more introduction, and I'll be done. I got to show you this girl. So I'm walking home one night in an alley. I can't tell you about her. She's wonderful. I got to tell you about her. Walking home in an alley, and somebody pulls my shirt, tug on my shirt. And I stop, and there's a doorway. And I look in the doorway, and there's this little girl. She's 8 years old. The door has a lintel over it, and she's using the lintel as a table because she had polio and couldn't sit up. She had no muscles at all in her legs. Her mom didn't want her, put her in a boat, pushed her out to sea. Someone found her, recognized her, brought her back home, and then her mom put her in a garbage can, public garbage can, and left. So the lady at that room took her out of the garbage can and raised her for several years. We became friends, and the Lord told me to go back and to see her every 2 or 3 weeks for the next 10 years. And she eventually enters the company because she learns how to use Corel Draw, and she earns a job, and then she rises up in the company. The Christians say, are you a Christian? And she goes, well, I'm not sure what that means. Well, do you know Jesus? And she goes, I know Jesus. Well, how do you know Jesus? Well, he used to sit with me on that lintel in the doorway and spend the afternoons. And then I remember that I had a pull on my shirt. Somebody wanted me to get my attention. Well, today, we have an operation. It's doing about $13 million of revenue. She's running the whole thing. So that's stuff to talk about. So now you get to criticize it, or discuss it, rather. And so how do you want to set that up? Sam, you want to do that?
Thank you so much. When I saw that shirt, I knew. When I saw this shirt, I knew that was going to be really good or really strange. And that was awesome. If you're not inspired by that, you're either dead or... And what's freaky is your Chinese, I don't speak Chinese, is so good. I mean, my wife is Chinese, and it sounds like the same. So that's awesome. Okay, so that was... No, stay, sir, stay. Yeah, stay up here. Sir, nobody Boss. You see how tall he is against all those Asian people in those photos? He's like a really short Asian person. We're not that short. Okay, so we're going to introduce Enoch Wang, who's going to be asking all the questions today. Enoch is a part of the BAM family here. Huh? But Enoch is going to lead the table talk? Yeah. Mike, you're just the executive director. Just sit tight. Just sit tight. We're getting to you. You just sit tight, Mike. Okay, so think of a question that you want to ask Bill. Cool name, Bill Jobs, right? That's cool.
还不行啊。我姓 my name is Job.
Job.
Actually, yeah.
Okay.
I haven't been correcting people, so Steve Jobs influenced the pronunciation. Yeah.
Okay, well, we'll get you the Nineveh. Just anyway. So, Enoch, if you want to come up, you can lead the table talk.
你要不要用中文？
可以啊，我们可以用中文啊。
好的，
好啊，大家好。It means hello. Wow, I'm actually blown away. Makes my Chinese feel bad. Stop recording. My girlfriend's gonna send it to my mom and be like, "Look at this white guy. He speaks so much good Chinese." This is definitely not in the script, so. But you can't fire me because I'm not getting paid. Oh my goodness, good times. Okay, so it is my belief that we have table talks. So for the next 20, 25 minutes, within your groups, I don't know if we have questions on screen. We'll have questions on screen. Feel free to go through those. Also feel free to just, if you were inspired by anything, if you were challenged, I would welcome you to open up with the team. I think a lot of what your stories was really riveting. I think it really both convicted me in some areas, but also very encouraged me in many. And I think a lot of you share the same. And also, I was really blown away by, yeah, your Chinese, your wit. And also, you would just say things, and I'm like, okay, I got to take notes. But then you're already on another story. That's why my girlfriend's taking notes for me. But yes, so I'll let you guys go in your groups, and then I'll call you guys back for questions and answers. Thank you. I'm actually interested in a lot of things. I wish we had like 2 hours to talk. But one of the things I want to start with is I think it's really fascinating, the idea of partnership with God, and how sometimes we see him as, he's our God, but it's you do you, I do me, and then I'll consult you for something, but it's not really consulting, you're just telling him what you're doing. And at the end of the day, you do your thing. And so with the partnership thing, so I have a few business partners. One of my main business partners is Ivan, sitting here. And we don't necessarily get along all the time. Usually we don't, most of the time. But we love each other as brothers. We get stuff done. And so my question is, in your partnership with God, are there times where you disagree? And how do you deal with disagreements or fallouts or things of nature, what may come with partnerships?
That's a good question. Let me try to do an honest gut check here. Nope, we don't disagree. Well, one thing is that it's in the definition of who he is. So we're not equal partners. He said one time, he's kind of clearing the slate, getting me educated. He said that the word price, P-R-I-C-E, is not a metaphor. So I heard this and I go, Lord, okay, I have no idea where you're going. He says, you think it's a metaphor, but it's not. So I said, I hear you, but I don't understand you. And then I could see the verse, you are not your own, you have been bought with a price. He says, because you think price is a metaphor, you think you're a metaphorical slave. It's not a metaphor. You're an actual slave. You are mine. I bought you with a quantity of my blood. So we're not equal partners. So when we sit down to discuss stuff, I'm sitting with the man who bought me. And so he has a more pull than I do. Does that make sense?
Yes, I love it. I think it's just examining just the relationship itself, saying, hey, we're partners, but it's a different sense. I love that. All right, let's go with some questions. So first one.
So I have a question, Bill.
Yes.
You've spoken about the successes of building your team, but is there some examples of failures and also struggles where you really needed God, and how did you deal with that in your business?
Yes. My first hire was evidence that I was no good at HR. So I hired a guy. Would you mind if I stand up? I can't see people in the back.
That's Stan. Shake it up
Not
a
you
little
guys,
bit.
but we can do it. So I hired this gentleman to be my general manager in the beginning. And when I brought in that other man that I mentioned earlier that taught me about I don't have to be speaking all the time, he saw this other gentleman and he said, why is he here? And I said, oh, well, he's my general manager. And he goes, this is not good. This guy will betray you. Well, should we fire him? And he says, no, he'll kill you. So I said, okay, what do we do now? And he goes, now we pray. And so 3 months goes by, and the bad guy purchases some things, and I'm really scared to death of the guy. And I said, well, you did that badly. I told you not to buy them, and he's probably getting a kickback. And the next morning, I got a phone call, and he said, we are now enemies, and we must fight. I will kill your children, and then I'll kill your wife, and then I'll kill you. And if I die, it doesn't matter. So not my better day as an HR manager, right? But the Lord used it later on. Remember I mentioned he had me memorize the Sermon on the Mount? And so I was at a red light waiting for the light to turn green. And over there they had those big counters, the big numbers. And so it's like 26, 20, 25, 24. How's it go down? Yeah. So he rides up on a bicycle behind me. And I'd seen him only once before in a couple of decades, and it got me all nervous. But now he's on a bicycle behind my car. I can see him in the rearview mirror. He doesn't recognize me. 24, 23. And it never occurred to me to put it in reverse and gun it. That was good. That was really progress. And so the light goes green. I drive through and I'm talking to the Lord. I said, Lord, that was really better. I just didn't feel all tense and everything. And the Lord said, that's not my standard. I expect you to love this guy. And I thought, dang, I just read that about you. So that's how that one kind of came around full circle. I haven't seen him, had a chance to talk to him, but that was a really bad move. In other cases, sometimes the beggars that would bring in, one of them betrayed us and stole a bunch of copper, and it went badly. And then we fired him, and he sued us for not firing him correctly, and we settled out of court. And so they don't all turn out well. And I just go back to the Lord and said, Lord, okay, we maybe got off track. What do you want us to do? And how do you process it? So you just go through it that way.
Thanks, Bill. And
question.
thanks for the question. Second question over here.
Hi there, my name's Nathan. Just talking about abiding, I've recognized a tendency in myself where it's really easy for me to serve others, but it's a lot harder for me to receive service. And I think similarly with God, right? Thinking that I can serve God, but just this idea of abiding and receiving well from Him. Do you have any tips or advice on speaking into that?
I don't think we like him, if I'm really honest. I think most of us don't like who we think he is. I didn't like my Heavenly Father for a while, and one of the reasons is I got the story that he's a guy who starves his son for 40 days and then puts him head to head with the biggest enemy in the world. What kind of a father is that? Now, I wasn't honest enough to face that, so it was hidden beneath me. And then you have a lot of Old Testament stuff that he's always mad. How many of you think God's always mad? You know, a lot of people actually do. So they say, oh, no, you need to go spend time with this mad guy. And so he asked me, see if this will help when I get through this little story. He asked me, if I spend 2 hours with a friend at Starbucks, is it because of that friend's personality or that friend's character? What would you say? That's what I said. And he said, good answer. Then he asked this question, what do you think of mine? And before I could control myself, I just blurted out, I didn't know you had one. Lord, I'm so sorry, but I went to seminary. We only studied your character. I know you're really, 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 really good. I have no idea if you're fun. And he goes, that's the problem, because relationships flourish on personality alignment. And he actually has the best personality in the world. And so I said, could you help me with this, understand your personality? And he said, sure, do the math on my first miracle. Do the math on your first miracle. Oh, the water into wine. He says, you guys have no idea what 6 pots of water really means. So do the math means convert it to bottles of wine. We understand what a bottle of wine means. Okay, get ready. It's over 900 bottles of wine. And so he says, what does it tell you about the personality of someone who brings 900 bottles of wine to the tail end of a party? And I go, you are not the guy I thought you were. So, abiding is more attractive every day now, you know. So he gave me 2 other clues. One is, he said, is it possible for a person to be better at being good than I am? Is it possible for a person to be better? No, Lord. I'm going to go out on a limb and say, I think you're the best. You know, theoretically at least, nobody can be better at being good. Then he said, then everything you see that's good, especially relationship-wise, I want you to think of me as being good at that thing. So a father tossing a kid up in the air. He said, they got that from me. You know, holding hands with your kids. Walking through the park. Dad bending down and kissing his daughter's head on the top. Oh, you got that from me. That's my personality coming out. Because you couldn't be better at being good than I am. right? So it opened up a huge arena of understanding, what is he really like? We get all of this good stuff from him. So he's more and more attractive. But the last was, I was preaching in a church in China, international church, and he interrupted me, as he sometimes does. And in the middle of the sermon, he says, okay, I've got control now. Give me the controls. Yes, sir. So he said, I want you to do a reenactment of the prodigal son 2 times. And I want you to ask the congregation which one is the most biblical. And so one of my good friends, Michael from Africa, is in the back. And I said, Michael, would you mind being the prodigal? He said, no, that's fine, sure. And so I have no idea where we're going with this at this time. So please understand, this is on the fly. And so Michael starts walking up, and I hop off the platform. It's kind of like this. And I run to him, but not terribly enthusiastically. And I greet him and hug him and welcome him. I'm so glad to see you, Michael. And this is great that you're home. Come on, let's go up to the house. And I put my arm around him, and we start walking up. And then I stop. And I go, before we get home, I think we probably ought to have a conversation about family values one more time. Kind of review some basics, Don't really want you bringing this lifestyle back, to the house. But it'll be fine, and people kind of smiling, and then we take a few more steps and stop again. And we probably ought to talk about a financial repayment plan. There's some money hanging out there that we need to solidify. But it'll be fine. It'll be great. It'll be great. And so then I kind of walk him up and say, okay, that's the first time. Now let's do it again. And it's still, I don't know what's going to happen. So he goes back and touches the back wall of the church and turns around. I think the Spirit just took me over. I flew off the platform, broke my little toe. I got to him before he took 2 steps. Now he's 6 foot tall, I'm 5'7". I'm lifting him up in the air. I'm screaming his name as loud as I can. I'm undone with the feeling of God's love for him that's just flowing through me. I'm kissing him on the cheek, and I'm screaming his name, and I can't believe this is my son who is dead. He's alive, and I'm just, shouting it out to everybody. Quick, get the Marriott, breakfast, lunch, and dinner for the next week. Biggest party, and there's no hint of family value reviews. No hint of money. And I'm thinking, could he love me this much? Now, which one is more biblical? That's the story. That's his personality. Now, if you say, you really need to abide with him, the response is, I get to do that? Whoa, let's do that. That's great. It's so easy once you know who he is, especially at that level. Does that help?
Thank you for that, Bill. I just love your sense of glee. Your unbridled joy when you talk about God. And yeah, I'm just really moved by that. Next question here.
I have a question. Oh,
Ooh.
no, I'm going to hand it over.
Now I got to wait for Sam's question. It's going to be spicy.
What did like dying to self look like? Like Bill before, I guess, you knew Christ. And then Bill after, and like now inviting him into that process. Like, was that hard, or what did that surrender look like?
I think coming through kind of a church approach, it's much harder than it needs to be, because we tend to kill ourselves. We tend to be the one doing the work. And so we need to deny yourself. That's actually quite difficult. And you're never successful at it completely. And so yourself still is there. It's easier to believe that you've died. Romans says 44 times, you died, you died, you died, you died, you died, you died. If you just say 44 times, you died, you get the picture. You actually died. You have a new heart. If you start living out of your new heart, you will find you're there. You've already arrived at that place. And so I think the way you try to die to self is critical. And there's an easy way that doesn't take years. It's not painful. It's just recognition of reality. But there also is one more little trick to it that I'm working on this year. I'm still learning. I've learned more in the last 5 years than the previous 48 about how the kingdom works. the kingdom is such a deep subject. I just love exploring it. So he brought my attention to two voices in me. The scripture says, or does not say, let me ask you, that I have the Spirit of God in me crying, Abba, Father. Is that true or not true? True. Now it also says, my spirit cries out, Abba, Father. They speak, Abba, Father. So my spirit's alive now. His spirit in me, and they're crying, Abba, Father. That's like the perfect spiritual response to everything. I'm already there in that part of me. The problem was I had that volume turned down so low that they weren't influential. It's kind of like they're on FM and I was dialed into AM. And I've been practicing in the last 6 months. Can I find them and turn their volume up? And I found out that they've become like a duet, like a, where's Sam? Yeah, like a duet, right? A musical team. I can join them. And I do this primarily through worship music that I like to listen to. I try to get in at least 30 minutes in the morning and sometimes hours. And I find myself just singing along with them because they're so much better at words, the music that you can get, download. That, if you do that a little bit, you will find yourself just going way into the back. You disempower it, and you empower what's already in you, living a perfect spiritual life. Is that like weird?
No, that's really good. And I guess the question is, are you going to sing a duet now with Sam?
My wife has a degree in voice. She informed me I'm not what you call an independent singer, which means put me in a choir of 40 and I can maybe, not mess up.
Okay, maybe we'll do a karaoke after, but we'll pass it back to Sam for a question.
You're like a blended color, like stained glass.
Bill, you said you started like a dozen companies in China. You have one going and blowing now. Can you talk about ownership and governance within that context of China? Here in U.S., there's stock ownership, there's board of directors, and there's governance questions. And then maybe tag on and what you planned, because you talked about some succession, which was you gave stuff away.
Yep. So
how do you tie all those concepts together? What's your worldview around that? And God owns it, you said.
Yeah, the theory is he owns it. Technically, it can be difficult to actually execute on. And you can get lawyers who are supportive and will write Jesus into the contracts or into the membership. So the company I have right now in China, I own 60% of. It's a manufacturing facility, but I don't own any of that company. I own shares in a Hong Kong company. The Hong Kong company owns that company lock, stock, and barrel. And so the Chinese company cannot have shares legally. So we can split the ones in Hong Kong. What I'm intending to do now is that we have a licensing agreement with the U.S. company. They came over and visited last month and were so impressed they want to buy it. But I don't want to sell the whole thing. And so I would like to sell them the controlling interest, but I want the girl in the wheelchair to receive 10%. And there's another girl that we didn't get to talk about, but she's like the pastor of the company. And she ran that bevel glass division for us. She's the girl with the 5th grade education that is a champion in the kingdom. And so I want to give her 10%. I asked, because I have everybody's picture on my computer. Last time I was there, I said, can you give me an update on everybody's situation? And so she said, well, yeah, here's our employee. His name is so-and-so, and his daughters are so-and-so and so-and-so, and they're in this grade, and they're doing fine. But his brother was in an accident, and we went 500 miles away to go visit him in the hospital and take care of the medical bills and stuff. She went through 114 people. Knew every child, every relative, every family stress, every struggle. Wouldn't you love to just give her some economic power in the kingdom? So she gets another 10% if we get to do this right. But I'm not a great person at setting all that stuff up. So I try to lean into, Lord, what are you saying about this? This is your company. You actually own it all. We're just stewarding it.
Wow, sounds like a great boss.
He is.
Yes, so lots of questions here. Sam, where are you at? question in the back, and also there's a question in the front. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing your story. Question for you. If God owns the company, which I really love hearing, how do we square Romans 13 and debt, living in a debt society?
Can somebody quote the verse?
Oh, no man, anything.
So where's the conflict?
So what I'm struggling with, I guess the question is getting loans and getting lines of credit and having a business that is in debt and living in a debt society.
We are a debt-free company. We have zero debt. We just never got it. Okay, so I don't mean to be flippant. I do understand that it's a typical way that businesses operate, but when we started with a $10,000 investment from my friend who got sick and passed away, and we just rolled that over. Now, we did have a couple of times when people invested more money, but it was because God sent them and told them to invest the money. And so when we had the money, we would expand, but we never expanded based on debt. And I'm not saying that's not a good idea. I just haven't had to confront the issue myself. So it would be a question to him. So, Lord, do you want to expand this way or not? And what I've heard people say, theologians that I respect, is if you take out $1 million loan that's not due for 5 years, you have no debt until the 5 years is up. Or if you have interest payments every month, your debt is limited to the interest payments. If you pay the interest payments on time, you actually haven't incurred any real debt. But it feels like an obligation and a debt are very similar kinds of things. I was never totally comfortable with that, but I have heard people give that as an explanation.
Thank you for that. Next question.
I've got a two-part question. Basically, firstly, this has to do with the vision statement. It says using his company. The journey of building a business is fraught with, it's akin to walking a very rocky hiking path that at any moment you could drop off a cliff and die. So at any given
Let's all do that, okay?
Yeah. So I envision it as having to rely on our Lord to give direction. So at any given moment in that journey, was there ever a time where God says, you know what, this business, maybe it's time for you to relinquish it and maybe go on to something else because it's really you that is serving me. Now, in line with that, that's the first part of the question. The second part of the question is, in line with that spirit, the succession plan, the company has been built largely by God, through you as a conduit. And in that spirit moves in the business. So when you sell the business, is there any consideration for the continuation of that spirit? Because anybody could come in and they're essentially looking for a profit. So they could sell it, hedge funds could take it over and so on, because everybody wants a piece of China right now. So
that's a great question. In the one company that I had for 20-something years that he did ask me to give away, we didn't randomly give it away. He identified the person to take it over who had worked in managing it for a year. And we thought we had done a relatively good job of transferring the culture to him. Probably we hadn't done a good enough job because it didn't really remain like we would like. And I think a person, once they have money, they may respond differently than when they plan to if they're, don't get it yet. So it's something like that. You're really bringing up an excellent point. I feel like now, if I'm a steward of a company that the Lord has given to me, and I need to transfer out because I have other things to do, then I need to grow up someone to take it over who really understands not just the culture, but the fundamental method of walking with God that has built it. And if I don't do that, I shouldn't expect the same results. So we're calling it relational investments in the Lord that we make, and we want to see relational equity. So a lot of these stories are evidence of relational equity with God. It is real value. But that's actually because we did a lot of relational investing. And so I have a company now in the US that has been floundering for a couple of years. And I realized just because I handed it off to mature believers doesn't mean that they understood how to do that. And I think there's a disadvantage in living in your home country because you don't have the pressure on you that you do when you live in a foreign country, kind of on assignment. And that subtle pressure will keep you closer to the Lord than you will be if you're home. And so we're having to learn how to construct that intentional investing to get the same fruit out of the relationship that we had overseas. And it's coming back. The good news is you can do it. The bad news is that you probably have to change some things.
Great question, and thanks for the great response again. So unfortunately, a lot of time. I know there's a lot of hands that went up. If you do have questions, you can try to find Bill, find a time to chat with him after. But maybe in 30 seconds, I'll give you a last chance to say, what do you want to say to the audience? Your closing remarks.
BAM is a way to position ourselves for the greatest revival in history. And the reason is if we get this relationship with Jesus down right, get it really good, you have the maximum number of touch points with people, contact points. Every time you have a contact point with a person, you have a chance for Jesus to show up in that. So you bring him into every conversation, every interaction. And I think it's just the context is so perfect for revival to break out.
Thank you, everybody. Let's get